from the Asia Society program team. This is our second session of the Lalan Symposium, and this afternoon, we're going to have a panel discussion. May I introduce our moderator this afternoon, Ms. Gao Yi. Ms. Gao is the program lead of Christie's Education Asia, and she is responsible for the developing courses, curricula, and program content, as well as leading the courses and lecturing on topics related to the art market. She involved in marketing, branding, and student recruitment. So may I leave the stage to Ms. Gao? Like that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everyone online. Welcome back to Asia Society Symposium, Synaesthesia in Art and Lalan. This morning, Catherine gave us a wonderful presentation with important historical photos depicting a vivid image of the wonderful artist, our artist of music, of dance, and of painting, and beyond. In Dr. Kwok's presentation, she offered us fresh perspective to understand Lalan's work. Other than looking at her work from the traditional art historical frameworks of feminism, cross-cultural studies, and abstract expressionism, we can look at her work from the perspective of synesthesia in art, which leads to our discussion this afternoon with three distinguished speakers from three different fields, one from painting, one from music, another one from dance. So I would like to introduce our speakers this afternoon. I will start with Dr. Francis Yu. Professor Francis Yu teaches at the Baptist University of Hong Kong. He was born in Hong Kong, grew up in Hong Kong, but he studied art in the West. And he pursued his studies with a PhD in Chinese paintings at the China Academy of Art in Hangzhou. His current practice focuses on Chinese painting, and he also developed a lot of research into his concept of total painting. He is also the academic advisor to the current exhibition on Lalan at Asia Society. Our next speaker is Gongji Singh. We call him Kong. Kong is a renowned composer, performer, and music activist. Kong's compositions and performances focuses on experimentation with different formats, including pop, classical, and other music and theater art. He has collaborated frequently with choreographers, directors, and theater artists, and performed around the world. Our third speaker is Alan Lam. He is an accomplished choreographer and performer with a broad-reaching talent covering classical ballet, contemporary, and experimental dance. He has performed with many major dance companies in Hong Kong and in the United States. Today, he continues to produce outstanding works in collaboration with visual artists, musicians, theater directors, actors, dancers from different cultural backgrounds. Let's welcome the three speakers. I'm sure we're all looking forward to take our understanding in synesthesia in art to the next level by having this interdisciplinary conversation with artists from three different fields. So I understand we'll start with a presentation by each of you. So may we start with Dr. Yu.
Okay. Thank you, Gao Yi. Yeah. My training is in Western painting. So me as a painter, maybe I take this the next 10, 15 minutes to talk about or to share with you what I see in this exhibition and how I feel about Lan Lan's work. Lan Lan is an interesting artist doing very interesting works, but he's not known to us, not known to the audience in Hong Kong, including me. But I think it's this exhibition or this symposium is a good opportunity for us to know more about Lan Lan and her works. And, well, may I also say my talk in the next 10, 15 minutes, I see it also as a starting point in Chinese, 拋磚引玉. I put this a painting as the first image because it's one of my favorite paintings in the exhibition. And, well, there are plenty of interesting works in the exhibition. And I believe you will find your own favorite paintings there. I was here last Saturday, and that's the performance by Alan and 6 dancers. It's a very interesting performance. And right before that, I saw the exhibition and saw the works. But it was not the first time I saw the works in the museum. I didn't attend the opening, but I was fortunate enough to have a preview of some of the works at Gui Fang Hin Gallery. And, well, it's an absolute experience. I saw some works not only hanging on the walls, but also some works just pulled out from the wax in the storage. There are a lot of images. I mean, when you look at paintings on the wall, you see them as images. But when I was looking at or examining the works in the storage of Gui Fang Hin Gallery, so I see them as objects. Keep a very close distance to look at them. See how the dots of paint falls on the surface, how the lines move around, or how the layers of paint build up the surface. And I was curious the time when Lan Lan was working in front of her paintings at her studio. Because suppose she also kept such a distance to work at her paintings. And I was also curious, what's the situation Lan Lan was facing as a Chinese female artists in the post-war Paris. And also some questions that pop up to my mind. What Lalan has discovered, what is she aware that she discovered something with her own ways trying to bring together music, dance, and painting. This is the first space or the room when you're entering the museum, and all the walls are painted in black. Well, one can tell quite easily the paintings are done by a Chinese artist. If you look at the captions, of course, or even if you get closer to look at them, you find there's some inks there, some oil paints there. You find some that kind of tools and materials sometimes are put on canvas, sometimes are put on paper. So it's kind of interchangeable use of tools and materials. Much more than that is about the brush mark. I wouldn't say that the brush marks are equivalent to the idea of being more bắt mắt. But I think one can tell there are some hints of that idea. That is another space. That's the second room in the museum with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paintings hanging on the wall. And when I entered the room, it was much brightened up. And I find all the lines, flowing lines, here, there, everywhere, in the paintings, from the paintings. And I showed 2 paintings on the left-hand side, and the one on the right has been presented this morning by Catherine. I put it with more descriptive. I would say that moment I was touched by the rhythm of the dancing lines. And, well, they're just beautiful. And I must say that I found Lalan being there from all the lines. And, well, by the way, Chinese painting essentially is a linear art. Entering into another room, I saw this video that was done in 1995. It's about Qigong, Heigong. And after seeing that video, I changed my mind about Lalan's work. Because before seeing the video, I was thinking those flowing lines are kind of very physical, coming from some energetic movement, gesture from her body and the hands. But that video showing Lalan's dancing is so gentle. Excuse me, because me as a painter, a male painter, sometimes I perceive things with my sense from a masculine, think of it as a masculine perspective. But after seeing the video, when I look at the works again, and I start to enjoy more on the works, and I appreciate more what's going on around me. Bear in mind, Lalan's formal training is in music. So when you think of bringing dance and painting together, they must have something to do with music. And this is a painting entitled To Echo for Hearts. When I was looking at this painting, I was trying to think of how to make sense of it. Of course, in the context of visual arts, so it's like how to make visual sense of it. And, well, let me put it this way. I was thinking, if the works trying to bring music and painting together, maybe it wouldn't work that well. Maybe it's too convenient. But when Lalan has an intention trying to bring music, painting together with dance together, it makes perfect sense. And it's to me. It's not unusual to have artists who would like to bring together things or have an intention to integrate different art forms. Some names that we know, like Kandinsky, Paul Klee, Yves Klein, or, well, go back to 19th century, mid-19th century, Richard Wagner. He coined the term the total work of art, and trying to put together drama, music, poetry, visual arts together. And that kind of attempts, or that kind of idea, was not unfamiliar in Chinese art as well. If we look at Chinese painting, the ink painting goes with Chinese calligraphy, also goes with silk and gaving. So the idea of bringing things to a unity is not unusual in the West or in the East. But to my knowledge, I cannot think of a Chinese female artist at that time with such an intention or interest like Lan Lan. Attempting to bring dance, music, and painting together. And much more than that, I think Lan Lan is not using a conceptual framework to approach her work. She trusts the sense. So if you have a strong sense, you would trust them. That sense is based on her experience. I would say that Lan Lan is just honest to herself. And I think that's very important in art making. That's also why I admire Lan Lan's works a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. I was thinking when you were explaining just now, for somebody like Lan Lan who actually had no academic training in painting and who had no conceptual framework towards art making, maybe for her, the music is the color, the dance movements are the brush strokes, and she created art purely following her intuition. So up next, thank you so much, Dr. Yu. Up next, let's move on to Kong from the perspective of an artist from the music field.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I don't know how much you know about like Lan Lan's background. And when you read his bio, you notice that her first art training is music. So when she was in Hangzhou, she went to a music school, and she played the piano, and she studied voice with a Russian teacher. And then he and his first husband, Zhao Wuji, moved to Paris in 1948. And I think he didn't start painting until in the 50s. And while in Paris, before her first painting, she continued her musical studies. And she also took dance lesson in Martha Graham Center in Paris. So here you have a painter, but her first two major artistic training is like in different areas, like first music and then dance. And then she started producing her work. And like what we talked about, Catherine was talking about this morning about, her style is very much in line with like informalism, or a similar counterpart in the States like abstract expressionism. So in a way, she's kind of that movement. And then in the 67, I believe, and 72, he did two soundtrack for two films, very experimental. And then also in the 70s, we start seeing she's combining her dance, her kind of painting, or sometimes almost like an installation environment. And so it's like dance, music, and visual element together. And it was like, in a way, it's like in the area of what some of us call total art. What I'm going to do in the next like 10, 15 minutes is like, I want to show you her music background. I want to show you, I will play some of her music first, and then I will use her music teacher, Veres, and her husband's music, the second husband. I want to put things in perspective. I want to give you a general idea of where's Lana's music coming from. And then hopefully I have a little time to share with you my observations of her so-called total art. And so first of all, let's listen to some of the music she has done first. I want to show you the first one is like, the first one I want to show you is like a film made in 1966. And Lan Lan did the soundtrack for that. So that was the first example I showed. Is like if I had 4 camels, the title is pretty abstract. And if you pay attention to the music or the sound, I mean, some people probably wouldn't agree in the 60s to the notion that that was music, because they ask, where's the melody, where's the rhythm? But and also it's like, where's the musical instrument, other than the singing toward the end of the example? So what you heard was like mostly kind of more electronic sound. That's, I think, even by today's standard, that soundtrack is pretty avant-garde, pretty experimental. And Imagine is like in 66. But that's exactly the point. In the 60s, I think starting in the late 50s, in the 60s and early 70s, Europe is really the playground for all these avant-garde artists, especially in music. Of course, later, because like around that time in Germany, you have like Stockhausen. In France, you have Boulez and Veres. And then in the States, you have John Cage. And 3 of the most important avant-garde composer, or you call it a music maker or noise makers. The other interesting about the example I just showed you, if you just look at the images, they're pretty straightforward. You recognize human faces. You recognize certain artwork like sculpture and things. But the soundtrack didn't support that. So the soundtrack is more trying to depict more psychological or emotional state, which is in a non-linear fashion. Okay, let's go to the second example, another film track he did in 1972, 3 Cheers for the Veil.
For the Dutch, you were also a resource, but even more, glory. Do you know that the rich ship owners brought painters onto their boats to capture live the hunting scenes that would later decorate their living rooms. There, your image survives Wales in the unchanging light of the emerging bourgeoisie. This eternal light they invented as the tangible sign of eternity they took for granted. These boats floated forever. This big beached whale was beached forever. And the reign of the merchant bourgeoisie, whether it traded in money or whales, was there forever. We followed you to the end of the world, Wales, hanging from your tail as if you were big black comets. We followed the directions you gave us, and maybe Jules Verne was right when he said it was you who led men to their most distant discoveries, Spitzberg and Cape Horn. You who are horrified of being mistaken for fish, you were our fish pilots. Wales, I love you. You look like our planet, the Earth, round and surrounded.
Okay, so this is also another example. It's like you ask, does the music support the visual images? Yes and no, because like apparently she's taking a very different, or one can say a non-traditional approach. Is the story is very straightforward, but then the background music is totally abstract. And also you kind of like looking at two different universes at the same time. At this point, maybe I want to show you an example her second husband, Van Tienen, did in the, I think in the 60s or the late 50s. Let me see. Okay. The second husband, I think I'm probably in the late 50s. Van Tienen is a very interesting person. He would start out as a musician composer, and then he get into visual art. He was also famous as a kinetic sculptor. Later I will show you an example. It's a record. Van Tienen did the soundtrack for this famous poet at that time. So what you will hear is like someone reading the poem in a pretty straightforward way, and then he created a soundtrack. Listen to it, and then you may see the similarity between Lan Lan's last example. It's like for the whale soundtrack.
On n'a plus honte sous la cloche, on a vendu ses mots, on a posé son œuf, on a posé ses nez.
Yep.
In Paris.
So that was her second husband's example. You see the similarity. Also, what you hear is like electronic sound, and then in those electronic sound, you also recognize some almost like water sound. So at that time, when they in the late 40s in France, there were two kind of like composer musicians developed this whole idea of like music concrete. what they did is like they will just kind of like field recording. They will go out to the train station to record the sound of the train, or go to the factory to record the sound of the machine. So at that time, they're using, that was, of course, before the cassette tape. They were using what we call the magnetic tape, kind of like open reel tapes. And then they did all this recording, and then they would cut up the tape and do a collage with the sound. That's different from electronic music. Electronic music, by definition, you generate the sound through using machine. So music concrete is different. It's like concrete music, meaning like you use the existing sound and then play around with that. So in the early day, you hear a combination of both. And then I want to talk about Varese. In many articles about Lan Lan, they all say Varese was her teacher, but I don't really have concrete information on that, because Varese, starting the 50s, he spent a lot of time in New York. In fact, he basically lived in New York until the end of his life in the late 60s in Greenwich Village. And I had the fortune, I was in his house in the 90s. So the house was like occupied by his very famous student, Joan Jung, which will be another 4 hours presentation. So Joan Jung was his most famous student, and also the head of the composition department in Columbia. So the house was very much preserved as the way the rest were living there. So I was able to see all the objects he collected. The rest is very, very much influenced by Orientalism. Not only Chinese, but also Javanese, Indonesian, I mean. So, for example, in his house, I saw a lot of Indonesian musical instruments. Lots of them related to the gamelan ensemble. So, everybody's saying that Lan Lan's biggest influence was Varese. So I want to talk about Varese a little bit. One thing about Varese, he proposed the idea of organized sound. What's organized sound? It's like kind of like the opposite of a melody or a recognizable melody. So when you listen to his music, it's almost you hear a sound mass. And then the interesting of the sound mass is that it creates different type of space. With melody, it's linear. It's from point A to point B. Of course, that is what classical music, even from the medieval time to Renaissance or to Baroque, like Bach, or the Mozart and 19th century Romantic period. It's linear. It's like from A to B to C. I mean, the most famous example got to be Beethoven's Symphony Number 5. How bum 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 bum. 35 minutes later, reach the final point. It's almost a journey. And many people said that we reflect the Christianity. How you're born, find your salvation, go to heaven or go to hell, whatever. So it's like linear. But someone like Varese, he's not the only one. In the post-Second World War period, in Europe and in the States, many artists influenced by Asian cultures. And one thing about Asian cultures, like very often we don't talk about this linear direction. For example, Buddhism, we talked about reincarnation. It's almost a circular type of situation. So in a way, organized sound, on one hand, it exists on its own. It's not like a melody. How from one point travel to the other point and reach the final resolution. Organized sound is a universe on its own. It can be 1 second long. It can be 10 minutes long. So within the organized sound, you find different kind of space compared with the more classical European classical art. And what about rhythm? In a way, the rhythm is like all over the place. It's not, you can feel the pulse, no pulse, almost like random. But at the end, it generates a kind of energy classical music never able to achieve. I'll show you an example. This piece called Deserts, and Varese have written this statement. The piece was written in 1950 and 1954. What's interesting about this piece, this is the first piece ever. It has like different sections, always like section A and section B. The section B is always an electronic sound score. So you have the first section performed by orchestra, and then the second section is a totally random type of electronic sound, and then go back to the orchestra, and then the electronic score again. We just listen to a little bit of that. And then there's a second section with just like pure electronic sounds. I think I'm kind of running out of time. Maybe I just show you one more example about Lan Lan's husband's kinetic sculptures. That's 1 minute segment. Yep.
In Paris, an exhibition of kinetic sculpture, sculpture that moves, and in this case a marriage of movement with sound. It's the work of a French composer who started studying music in 1929. After the war, he took a number of jobs to make ends meet: radio repairer, salesman, and even as market researcher into the consumption of tinned sardines. All this gratuitous information is part of the background story to the work of Marcel Vantien.
Okay, because I'm running out of time. So maybe in the group discussion, I'll touch on the total art concept. But at least what I just try to demonstrate is like, when you listen to Lan Lan's music again, you can relate to the example I have demonstrated. And also you'll notice one thing is, in my opinion, Lan Lan is part of this big movement. And that's very important, is that artists always influence each other. We are not a lonely island. So anyway, I think that's all for now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kong. Thank you so much for taking the time to find these precious materials and share them with us today. I think that really offers an amazing window into Lan Lan's art. I really like what you were saying about the organized sound. Because that's really what we see in Lan Lan's painting. First we see the rhythm, we see the space, and then it creates the energy. The fact that she was with all these artists, musicians together at the time, they were incorporating sounds from all aspects into their work, probably encouraged her to bring painting into her dance and her music. So now let's move on to the dance. Alan.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. And yeah, I think over today through different speakers, we all learned a lot about Lan Lan's background, her art, her exploration in different form and different expressions. So I'm just going to share mostly from the perspective of dance. And I was quite thrilled when when Asia Society approached me about doing a dance performance responding to Lan Lan's like her exhibition and all her paintings. And since I went on the research and do a lot of about her background, and just one thing really struck me was, her journey of exploring dance at that period of time. And to me, it took me to the space, a lot of memories about my time when I was studying abroad and dance with all the different artists from especially the American modern dance, since which Lalan was studying in Paris, in France. And I want to go back a little bit, since when I think about that, I thought, wow, I could not imagine as an artist, as a female artist at that time, travel all the way to the West and to find her own voice in her own art through as a dancer. And then I thought, wow, it's like all my dance history classes, and that thing about when modern dance started in the early of the 20th century with some really important female figures like Isadora Duncan. And I'm not going to go really deep in it, but then, it's also like Lois Fuller and Ted Shawn. All this actually really changed the form of dance in terms of from the traditional dance form like ballet and all the different have a lot. I mean, the form of dance has a lot of restriction, and then for them to actually find a way to change it, and especially over that time, it's like from that period of time, and then came, and then I knew that as Gong was saying, also about she was studying Martha Graham technique in France, and Martha Graham or even Doris Humphrey was like our pioneer of modern dance at that time, and they really found a way to have their own technique and really changing the way we perceive dance. We usually have traditional costume, and now they suddenly they designed it. They could dance barefoot. Which was really a big thing at that time, and also to instead of using the body in a totally different way of articulate it, and instead of just telling something about things about real life, they totally go into personal feelings, and or something about some like in terms of political or social background at that time to be the theme of their dance, which never happened before. And I thought imagine being influenced by that kind of idea and learning the technique, and suddenly and especially I think it was also a post-war time, and I think the world was suddenly allowed you to look at yourself and how yourself related to all the situation, the circumstances around you, which is really like I think it make the artists think a lot about themselves, which I think that actually took me to the space about creating the work that I actually presented last week. Was it was a journey as an artist to go through a lot of changes, and then I think then I go back and I think about as Chinese artists, and I mean for myself I always been, my background is always dance. I studied dance as a young artist, and then I go into to become a choreographer, and so that's my training. And then I thought, wow, imagining someone actually going into a different field, into become a painter, coming from a background as a dancer, I think that kind of senses. But then, until the time I actually saw her work in this exhibition, I was reading a lot of materials before, but then when I actually see the work, I actually see dance. it was incredible seeing, what Kong was describing, the rhythm, the space, and also incredible energies that she project through her work, which I thought, wow, was a lot of the time I could even, a lot of the time when I watch dance, that's how I feel from the work. And then I look at it, I was like, well, I tried to think of an artist that could that I could relate it to as Lalan, especially at that period of time. As a reference for me to even create this dance. Then I came across a very special person that I actually had met when I first visited New York many years ago. And this artist was Lin Huamin. And he founded Cloudgate. And at that time, he actually started as a journalist and a poet and a writer. And then later on, he met dance in New York, actually, and actually in America. It's not New York. And then later on, he moved. He was studying dance in New York. That was the time when I first met him. Remember, he took a break from running Cloudgate, and think that about he needed time to explore, to learn more about art and life in order for him to keep creating. Then I thought I didn't understand at that time, honestly, as a young artist. I was like, don't you just, you had the space to create already, and why would you need to go someplace else and to explore? I actually prepare a little clip of Lin Huamin's work, and it actually explains, it almost gave me the same kind of feelings when I watch Lalan's painting. Can I have my first clip? This is a piece of art, and I found, it was more than just a dance. Yeah, so with watching this work, as I was looking at Lalan's painting, that very strong tradition of the Chinese culture, the influence from the Western technique, and I think how these two worlds come together and being as a strong foundation to build this beautiful, like, poetic world of, like, in terms of the space, and I can almost, as you were saying, I can see the brushstroke of this body, and how it's the canvas, and with using the stage as the canvas, and to sort of paint this work, and also I was also quite lucky when one time I was able to dance in a work of Lin Huamin for one of our tour to Japan, and I met with him, and the way he inspires us as a young dancers. I don't remember he was telling us where I should put my arm, where I should put my leg. It was almost like speak to us like reading us a poem or something that I sort of took us a while to actually really learning. It's like that's not the language that I normally get it from a dance teacher, and then they usually get us to jump higher, or or this, like, hold this leg, but he was giving us all the pictures in my head in order to get into the spirit of the dance, and also the kind of energy he need from all of us to imagine we were the going through this. It was a dance about the native Taiwanese when they first arrived Taiwan, and then later on I found it's like, wow, in the like, I remember reading the after this, I think this pioneer of modern dance, they come into this like postmodern dances, and then they start creating work that was using rather than traditional theater space, proscenium space, we use like all kind of venue to create. And then I think this whole about finding new expression becoming, I think was the whole background for creating work at that time. And I thought, wow, isn't this important even for Laos today? I think we've forgotten that how wonderful to have that kind of influence, and then now we have a very safe space, and then hopefully I think I think when we are in a more in the conversation we can talk about more how actually Lalan incorporate all the different art forms together, and I think this is my sharing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I really love what you said about modern dance, when innovation was brought into dancing and how artists were bringing in elements of political issues and social issues into their work. And it reminds me that art, many forms of art, they are related. And a good artist should be able to absorb influences from many different aspects, from different cultures, from different times, into their artworks, to create artworks that can touch upon so many layers of culture, aesthetics, and different art forms. On that one, I would like to come back to the notion of total art. Kong, would you like to make a comment on it?
I guess if any of you came to this morning's section, Elaine did mention a bit about total art. I think I would kind of share my own kind of thinking on that. On one hand, total art been around. Okay, let me define a little bit why we are talking about total art, because toward the later part of Lalan's life, when she's like combining her dance, writing her own music, and then her painting or her, the installation. Maybe I can show a short example. Let's go back to my PowerPoint. How she play around with the objects, and I think that's the notion of total art comes in. Let me just see if I can find it. Which one? Let's say this one. Okay. Just as a short example, I think you can also have a longer version in the exhibition hall. So what you just saw was like Lan Lan designed the visual space. She designed the oral space, I mean her music. And she used her body to interact with the environment she created. Now, this is very, very different from if we're watching a dance performance on a stage with a set. Very often, you don't see a kind of like a organic relationship between the dancer and the environment. And almost as if they can just like, they can do it in Tsim Sha Tsui Cultural Center, or they can go to Yuen Long Town Hall. It wouldn't make any difference because it's artificial. But what Lan Lan is doing is like, she created this holistic experience. She wants to connect her body, her existence. And she wants to generate this energy with the objects she created, with the soundscape she created. So in a way, it's like the artist making a very complete statement. And also make it difficult for another, say, dancer to repeat that experience because it's so organic. So I want to talk a little bit about this concept of an artist wanting to do too much, or more than just what he or she specializes at. I think opera, which started around the 16th century, was one of the examples. Of course, you can say instead of like total art, it may be the good example of the first multimedia production. Because in opera, you have like music, you have literature, or poetry, the lyrics, right? And you have acting. You have like the visual aspect. So in a way, opera is the first attempt by putting all those elements together. Of course, when we reach like the mid-late 19th century, Wagner, the famous German opera composer, she did propose the philosophy of total art. So he even went to the extent he built his own opera house, because he cared about concept about the acoustic. He cared about the relationship between the audience, what they hear, what they see, and his work itself. So he write his own lyrics. He direct the whole thing. So that's like the most major example of like, but that is a little bit different from I think what Lan Lan is doing. I think Wagner was trying to address the whole notion of total control. Because that's a very typical kind of like a classical artist. Like for example, Beethoven, when he wrote the score of his music, the musical score represents 99% of what he wants to express. And he gives you 1% to interpret. You can play a little bit faster, but not that much. You can play, certainly you can do a little bit louder, but not that much, because there's so much instruction. I think the whole notion, what Wagner is like, try to be God. It's a very kind of Greek idea. And then, in the post-war period, artists want to break tradition. Tradition for them, Wagner is a major tradition. So let's like broke everything up. And some of the real good examples is like John Cage Cunningham and Rosenberg. Cunningham, another major modern dance artist. John Cage, He's a philosopher, he's a composer, he's a musician. And Rauschenberg is a major visual artist. In the 60s, they start working together to expand each other's boundary or to cross into another artist's arena. So that's also a very good example. So in a way, what Lan Lan doing was also part of that. But that's a difference between one person doing all things or different artists. But then you also have example, like for example, in the mid early 80s, Laura Anderson. Interestingly, she's kind of like a pop culture icon. But the way she combined her poetry, her writing, her story, the way she played her instrument, the way she used her body, it's also it's a good postmodern example, a counterpart of Lan Lan. In a way, Lan Lan was very much using what her friend, her contemporary artist doing, and she combined that together. And meanwhile, in the 80s, when you have someone like Laura Anderson, she creates something also very original. So in a way, I would say total art, or some people would just say, oh, if it's not strong enough, we just call it multimedia production. If you're able to integrate all the artistic element with your personality, with your emotion, with your psychological state, then that may be what we discuss as total art. That's my take on it. Yeah.
Thank you, Kong. It really reminded us of the context in which Lan Lan was creating her work. Dr. Yu, you initiated a lot of research into total painting. Would you like to share some thoughts on that?
I agree with Kong's mentioning about experiences. It's very important in terms of you enjoy the experience. You enjoy the experience of making artwork. That experience is bringing things together. And I think total work of art or total artwork is a translation from a German term, Semiga work. It's of course coined by Wagner, and he has his own intentions, the historical, political, social background, also her personal idea to coin the term, and it is a term, it's a terminology, but that's an approach towards it. I mean, I may give a term total painting, you may give a term total dance or total music, total architecture. So they are similarities, at the same time there are differences, and the differences are from the approaches. That's the ways you do things. And I think, well, I cannot say on behalf of others, but I think one of the major reasons or for me to do my work in such an approach, which I call it as total painting, is that I would like to comprehend the world. I would like to know more about the world. That's the environment around me, and it is complicated. So it's complicated. When I started to learn more about myself and the world, and when I continue trying to learn more about myself and the world, it's become more complex. And it's like things adding up. So to what extent that you add things up, if you coin the term there, it becomes, you may call it like total art, total painting, or whatever. This is also what Richard Wagner, in his own term, trying to bring together opera, theater, music, poetry, and visual arts.
I kind of think I just have a small response. I don't think total art is the future of art. I think artists always have a preference. Some people just enjoy writing piano music, and that's it. Some people just like enjoy being a DJ, use computer and all the newest software. So I think, and interestingly, if you're just talking about the application of like different medias, they have the best situation in the commercial world. Very often, it's like commercial world is doing total art, and then total entertainment with all these devices, with all this technology. But for an artist, I have seen so many performances in my life that a lot of them is like involved and using like all these like different artistic devices, all different genre, different like mixed different style together, mix different like art discipline together, and it's a bad piece of art. So I think unless the artists really have the real reason of doing it, I say please don't do it.
Thank you, Kung. I was thinking when Dr. Yu was saying how total painting is a way to allow yourself to bring in more things into your work and investigating into things that you're interested in. I was reminded of Lan Lan's work, where we can see clear evidence of her Chinese culture, Chinese roots, her inspiration from classical Chinese landscape painting, and also the color from the Tang Dynasty painting were all present. Maybe the notion of incorporating different elements into her painting gives her the window to explore that and bring those culture roots into her painting. I would like to come back to Alan. You organized this dance in response to Lan Lan's work. Maybe we can go reverse. How were you inspired by Lan Lan specifically in preparing your work? What were the brushstroke and colors that influenced you?
Yeah, as I was preparing my thought and my concept and actual materials for this particular work, and I back a lot of the time to Lan Lan's work at different time, at different phases of her creative life. I saw she was exploring a lot of different techniques, and almost I felt like, you know, this, from her time that she was exploring the world of dance, I mean from the music, and she was composing music and then going to the dance, and then how she incorporated like go into the painting, sort of, you know, exploring all the different even technique, and it's almost like trying to grab as much as like elements together. And I mean, what was that element? So at the end, most of her later work, when she combining all her different art form together, it's actually come back into very simple form, and give me a sense of like actually calmness and a whole more like grounded feelings, which I thought it was something very basic. And when I look at it, I was like, as I was doing my dance, I was like, well, what was a basic thing about dance? And when there was somehow to me, and that's actually, I went back to something very natural and something very organic. Especially, I was invited to do the work here at Asia Society, and I look at that space. That's the energy of nature was a big inspiration, and I look at Lan Lan's work of like doing landscape, using her technique. All this was coming from the energy of the nature, and these different elements. I'm looking at the wood, and the wind, the water, and the really strong energy of like stone, and all this, that the space giving me the energy, the idea of the body, and also I chose the music that was also inspired by Lanan's music. So that when they come together, I just find all these different natural, like organic elements through our bodies, then how they actually balancing each other, or how they actually confronting each other, giving me a strong sense of kind of a different language, which I find myself exploring again. Is rather than just taking, using my normal way of doing a composition. I have a theme, and then sort of using that theme and a very clear structure. I sort of allowing the work to just sort of evolve with the dancers that I chose this time. So it's sort of coming, and then when I have the movement materials, I go to different part of this space, and suddenly the movement become something new to me, and then I sort of capture it, and then find this journey about time to sort of join this whole journey that for the dance together, which I was kind of come together through this period of time with different input from the young dancers, which I thought I was even quite inspired as well. So I think this organic form of creating sort of helped me, or sort of how the inspiration from Lanan's work from.
Thank you, Alan. I think your dance, the performance was very informative in terms of our appreciation of Lanan's work, and also looking at Lanan's work enhances our appreciation of the dance performance. I would like to open the floor to questions. I wonder if any of you have any questions.
Hi, my name is Shirley Xu. I'm so glad that I could mention Joan Jung. It was actually here Tan Dun gave the talk years ago, Alice probably remember. And Tan Dun has mentioned like how different time that shape the artists. So I was so glad that Catherine and Asia Society is doing this in Lana. And I actually see her as a artist who was so influenced, like many of us, of many other people's work. And so we are, from her work, I could sort of, we are product of our period. So whoever you associate with, and the artists, the people you work with. So I was thinking about how the Asian culture that shaped the Western artists over that period, because those artists left China after World War II, they actually impact tremendously of the Western artists, and from the music, from art. And the other day I was looking at Judo Chun's work, how his work from his traditional Western-trained oil painter to his line for Chinese work. And then he was never trained in the Chinese artwork. In the older age, he started doing more calligraphy, he started doing more watercolor. And so I was wondering, like nowadays, with technology, people could actually create music. There's apps out there, you could actually make amazing music. And you could make amazing artwork with a lot of technology. So from your specialists in your discipline, where do you see the art going forward in terms of total art or specialized?
I'd like to respond a little bit to your question. It's like, I'm glad that you mentioned Joan Jung. I first met Joan Jung in the early 80s. And that was the first time I went to his house. It turned out to be the West House. And I mean, as a young artist, is from Hong Kong, my first question is always when I was like outside Hong Kong, is like, who was I? I mean, if I just compose like all my classmates, American classmates, did in their style, then where's my identity? So that's kind of question. So Joan Jung was a very big influence for me, and and our friendship lasts over 10 years. What I would say is we are in a very different world. I think in the post-Second World War period, the Europeans, especially the artists, are totally disappointed with the Western culture. So they start to go east. So in the 50s, you see, for example, it's like Suzuki, the Zen Buddhism master, gave a lecture at Columbia University. And John Cage went there to study with him. And whereas he's so interested in Asian culture, not only Chinese. And the other thing is like if you notice also in the 50s and 60s, Taoism is a big thing in the West. It influenced every aspect of art. And meanwhile, you start having a group of Chinese artists going abroad. I mean, imagine, like one of the first major Chinese composer in the early 20th century, Wang Ji, and he went to Germany to study. And he brought back, when he back in the around the 1920s, he brought Mozart back. He was teaching Mozart in Beijing. That was like 200 years behind. So I think in the late, for example, I think Joan Jung also went to a States in 1948. He was supposed to go to Yale to study architecture, but then his passion in music so strong, he gave up the scholarship and moved to Boston and went to New England and New England Conservatory and studied with Varese in New York. So you have this group of artists. I start going west in the 50s, and then a lot of them stay there. And at that time, the Western artist is hungry for something non-Western. And then the Chinese artists want to learn the modern Western culture. And that was the best for both. And I think like starting the 80s, the 90s, with the fast advance of technology, the internet, is like, when we talk about tradition, about culture, it's a very, very different tone. So I hate to use the word global village, but unfortunately, we are using the same smartphone. We dress the same. We drive the same cars. So it also affects how artists think. So the future is up in the air. But I don't know. I think now we talk about, in a funny way, we talk about individualism differently. Individualism simply means you have to find your own path as an artist. That's not a so-called collective aesthetics or collective whatever for you to follow. That's how I feel. Yeah.
Thank you, Kang. Do we have any other questions? Okay, I think, oh, there's one more over there.
Yeah, I have a question coming from outside of the art world, because I learned that she's not formally trained as an artist. So there has been a lot of appreciation expressed from an emotional point of view, an aesthetics point of view, and from the cultural point of view. But from a technique point of view, do you think not being formally trained has a lesser respect for her technique in the art? And for wannabe artists who just wish to express himself or herself, doing cross-disciplinary into the art form, will he or she gain a footing in the art critic world? So I appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Perhaps we'll direct this question to the artist and art historian, Francis.
I think your question and the question from another lady can be combined together. It's about art, culture, training, and I would say art is about senses. It's about art senses. I think Lalan is very good, and admire her because she trusts her senses. She has very strong senses. Because she has very strong senses, she trusts them. And that's why she has no problem to learn, to study, to appreciate different kinds of things. Painting, music, dance. And the music is like the dance is modern dance and the music is electronic music. To be honest, if I were an artist like at the time at Lalan, I could be blocked by something like culture, training, whatever, which I was not able to trust myself to do my work. So trust yourself, having a strong sense, but it doesn't mean that there's no inspiration, influences from cultures, from your training, and from other people. But what's the future? I think, again, trust yourself, have your sense, do something that you think you have a strong sense in it. It may not be art, it could be something else. I don't know whether I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I want to say one thing about the future of art. I think it's, I would put it very simply. It's like to echo Francis' point. I think when you ask that question, we have to think about what is the purpose of art? What's the meaning of art? So, and lots of time it's much simpler than we thought. I think if a good piece of art reflects the time, reflects the people of the time, reflect the emotion of the time, even the reality of the time. It can be technology, it can be the human heart, it can be the current political situation. So I'm very traditional in a way. If you're genuine, if you're able to use your technique to do a profound statement about the current world, the current reality, that's as good as we can do. Yeah.
Thank you, Keng. I think we're all looking forward to see the exhibition. Singing colors, dancing brushstrokes, grace and spirit in her extended figure, her life and performance on her canvases. This concludes our symposium today. Thank you so much for a wonderful discussion on Lalan's work and synesthesia in art. Thank you everyone for participating, for everybody joining us online today. Now we shall take a short break and head down to the gallery for